The world in the early 1800s was a place of great change and great conflict. The United States was a young nation, still figuring out its place on the global stage. It had won its independence from Great Britain less than 30 years before, and those revolutionary memories were still fresh. The country was expanding westward, filled with a sense of destiny and a hunger for land. But that youthful energy often clashed with older, powerful European empires who still saw America as a minor player. Across the Atlantic, Great Britain was locked in a titanic struggle with Napoleonic France. This war was a fight for survival and global supremacy. Every British decision was viewed through that conflict. The Royal Navy was Britain's key to power at sea. Britain needed sailors, resources, trade advantages. That need pushed Britain into repeated conflict with neutral America, which tried to trade with both sides. US-British relations were complicated and tense. They shared a common language, culture, and history. Their economies were deeply intertwined by trade. Yet deep mistrust remained. Many in Britain viewed Americans as upstarts and rivals. Americans guarded their independence and resented perceived British slights. The era was a delicate balancing act. The US sought neutrality, hoping to profit by trading with both Britain and France. But the scale of European war made real neutrality nearly impossible. Britain saw US-France trade as a threat, while France felt the same about US-Britain trade. The United States was caught in the middle, a small ship navigating between two crashing tidal waves of imperial ambition. In the early 19th century, trade was the lifeblood of the American economy. American merchants and sailors took their ships all over the world, carrying goods to and from Europe. This neutral trade was especially profitable because Britain and France were so busy fighting each other. This booming trade helped American port cities grow rapidly. Boston, New York, Baltimore. It created jobs and brought wealth to the young nation. However, this profitable neutrality soon came under attack. Great Britain, desperate to cripple the French economy, decided to stop all trade with France. Starting in 1806, Britain issued a series of laws known as the Orders in Council. These orders declared that any ship heading to a French-controlled port was subject to seizure by the Royal Navy. This meant that American ships, simply trying to conduct peaceful trade, could be stopped, could have their cargo confiscated, or could have their ships taken. Not to be outdone, Napoleon Bonaparte of France retaliated with his own set of rules, known as the Berlin Decree and the Milan Decree. These decrees stated that any ship that had first stopped in a British port, or had even been searched by the British Navy, would be seized by the French. This put American sailors in an impossible position. If they followed British rules, they were targeted by the French. If they ignored British rules, they were targeted by the British. They were caught in an economic vice, squeezed from both sides by the two most powerful nations in Europe, each demanding that America take its side. For the United States, these trade restrictions were more than just an economic problem, they were an insult to the nation's sovereignty. Americans felt that as a neutral and independent country, they had the right to trade with whomever they pleased. The actions of Britain and France were seen as a direct challenge to American independence, a sign that the old European powers still did not respect the young republic. The constant seizure of American ships and goods created immense frustration and anger, pushing the country closer to the belief that words were not enough to protect its rights on the high seas. One of the most infuriating issues for the United States was the British practice of impressment. The British Royal Navy was a massive fleet and constantly needed more sailors. It had hundreds of warships fighting Napoleon. Life in the Royal Navy was incredibly harsh. Low pay, brutal discipline, constant danger of battle. Many British sailors deserted and found better pay on American merchant ships. To stop this, Britain claimed the right to search foreign ships for deserters. This became a nightmare for American sailors. British warships pulled alongside American vessels. They boarded ships and lined up the crew for inspection. A British officer walked down the line, pointing out men he claimed were British subjects. They aimed to find deserters but were careless about who they took. Proving citizenship on the spot was often impossible. Native-born Americans who looked and sounded British were falsely identified and forcibly taken. It was state-sanctioned kidnapping on the high seas. Thousands of American citizens were stolen, forced to serve in a foreign navy. Their stories filled American newspapers and sparked national outrage. Imagine a young man from Massachusetts sailing to provide for his family, suddenly captured, dragged into years of British service. These tragedies became a national insult, a symbol of British arrogance. In 1807, the anger boiled over in the Chesapeake Leopard affair. USS Chesapeake was stopped off Virginia by HMS Leopard. The British demanded a search. The American commander refused. Leopard opened fire, killing 3 American sailors and wounding 18. The British then boarded the damaged ship and seized 4 alleged deserters. An attack on a U.S. ship in American waters looked like an act of war, and calls for retaliation rose. While tensions were rising on the high seas, another conflict was brewing on the western frontier of the United States. As American settlers pushed relentlessly westward into the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes region, they inevitably clashed with the Native American tribes who had lived on that land for generations. These tribes, including the Shawnee, Potawatomi, and others, saw their way of life and their very existence threatened by the endless flood of American expansion. Great Britain, which still controlled Canada to the north, saw an opportunity. By providing support to the Native American tribes, the British could achieve 2 important goals. First, they could slow down the westward expansion of the United States, which they viewed as a growing rival. Second, they could maintain a valuable buffer zone of allied Indian nations between the American settlements and their Canadian territory, protecting it from a potential United States invasion. British agents from Canada regularly met with tribal leaders, offering them weapons, ammunition, and other supplies to help them resist American encroachment. This British support empowered a powerful Native American resistance movement led by 2 remarkable Shawnee brothers, Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet. Tecumseh was a brilliant military leader and political strategist who traveled widely, urging different tribes to put aside their old rivalries and unite in a confederacy to stop American expansion. He argued that no single tribe had the right to sell land that belonged to all native peoples. His message of unity resonated deeply, and he began to build a formidable alliance that posed a serious threat to American control of the Northwest Territory. For Americans on the frontier, the connection between British meddling and Native American attacks was clear and terrifying. They saw the British as instigators, using the tribes as proxies to wage a brutal and undeclared war against American settlers. When American forces led by William Henry Harrison fought and defeated Tecumseh's Confederacy at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811, they found British-made muskets on the battlefield. This discovery was seen as undeniable proof of British treachery, further inflaming anti-British sentiment, and fueling the growing belief that the only way to secure the frontier was to drive the British out of North America for good. As these grievances piled up, trade restrictions, impressment of sailors, support for Native American resistance, a powerful new voice emerged in American politics. This voice belonged to a group of young, ambitious congressmen, mostly from the southern and western states. Known as the War Hawks, they argued passionately that honor and security demanded a firm, military response. They believed America had been patient for too long, and that it was time to fight to defend its rights. Leading figures among the War Hawks included Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. This was a new generation of American leaders, too young to have fought in the Revolutionary War. Their patriotism was not rooted in memory, but in a forward-looking vision of a strong, respected, expanding United States. They were deeply offended by British impressment, which they called a national disgrace. They also saw the conflict as an opportunity. A war with Britain, they argued, could end injustices on the sea, could lead to the conquest of British Canada, and could forever end British influence on the western frontier. The War Hawks were masterful politicians and orators. They used their positions in Congress to rally public opinion and pressure President James Madison toward a more aggressive stance. Their speeches were filled with fiery rhetoric about national honor, freedom of the seas, and the defense of American farmers and sailors. They painted a picture of Great Britain as an arrogant tyrant, determined to keep the United States weak and subservient. Their message found a receptive audience, especially in the western states, where frontier conflicts were a matter of life and death, and in the South, which was suffering economically from British trade restrictions on agricultural exports. This growing cry for war created a deep division within the United States. While the War Hawks and their supporters in the South and West clamored for a fight, many people in the New England states were strongly opposed to it. New England's economy was heavily dependent on trade, even the restricted trade that still existed with Great Britain. These Federalists feared that a war with the world's greatest naval power would be economic suicide. This internal disagreement meant that when America finally did go to war, it would be a deeply divided nation. The road to the War of 1812 was not a sudden turn but a long, slow journey paved with escalating provocations. The timeline shows a clear pattern of rising tension. By 1806 the problems began to intensify. Britain issued its first major orders in council and began blockading French ports. Napoleon answered with the Berlin Decree, tightening an economic vice on American shipping. This launched a more aggressive phase of economic warfare, directly targeting American neutrality and prosperity. 1807 became a critical turning point. The Chesapeake Leopard affair in June sent shockwaves across the United States. The unprovoked attack on a U.S. naval vessel was seen as a blatant act of aggression and a national insult. Jefferson, eager to avoid war, pushed Congress to pass the Embargo Act of 1807. The law banned all American ships from leaving for foreign ports. It was meant to force Britain and France to respect American rights through economic pressure. Instead, the embargo catastrophically damaged the American economy. After repeal, Madison tried a new diplomatic tack, passing the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809 and later Macon's Bill No. 2 in 1810. These laws tried to play Britain and France against each other, promising restored trade to whoever first lifted restrictions. Napoleon feigned compliance and the U.S. cut off trade with Britain. Britain felt tricked and refused to repeal its orders in council, viewing U.S. policy as openly pro-French. By 1811, the frontier crisis hit a breaking point. The Battle of Tippecanoe in November confirmed many fears. British-made weapons were found among defeated native forces, giving war hawks in Congress the evidence they needed. They argued Britain was fueling war on the frontier. Combined with the impressment of sailors and the deadlock over trade, a majority in Congress concluded diplomacy had failed. Peaceful negotiations seemed exhausted, leaving war as the only remaining option to defend American honor and security. By the spring of 1812, President James Madison found himself in an impossible position. For years, he had tried to navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy, seeking a peaceful solution that would protect American interests without resorting to war. He had overseen the Embargo Act, the Non-Intercourse Act, and other measures, all of which had failed to persuade Great Britain to change its policies. The pressure from the war hawks in his own Democratic-Republican Party was becoming immense. They accused him of weakness and argued that any further delay would be a betrayal of the nation's honor and the safety of its citizens. In a final, detailed message to Congress on June 1, 1812, President Madison laid out the full case for war. He systematically listed the nation's grievances against Great Britain. He cited the thousands of American sailors who had been impressed into the British Navy, calling it a crying enormity that tramples on rights which no independent nation can relinquish. He detailed the endless harassment of American shipping under the Orders in Council, which had plundered American commerce and crippled the economy. This was not just business, it was an assault on American sovereignty. Madison also pointed directly to the violence on the western frontier. He accused the British of inciting and supporting the savages, as he called them, in their warfare against American settlers. The evidence from battles like Tippecanoe made this connection undeniable in the minds of most Americans. He framed the conflict as a defense of American homes and lives against a foreign power that was using Native American allies to wage a proxy war. By combining the issues of the sea with the issues of the frontier, Madison presented a comprehensive picture of British aggression that touched every region of the country in some way. Convinced by the president's arguments and stirred by the passionate speeches of the war hawks, Congress moved to a vote. The decision was far from unanimous, reflecting the deep divisions in the country. The House of Representatives voted 79-49 in favor of war, and the Senate followed with a narrower vote of 19-13. On June 18, 1812, President Madison signed the declaration of war against Great Britain. Ironically, just 2 days before the declaration, the British government had decided to suspend its orders in council, finally feeling the economic pressure. But communication was slow, and the news did not reach America in time. The die was cast. The War of 1812, often called America's Second War of Independence, was a strange and sprawling conflict. The United States was not prepared for a major war. It had a tiny army and a small navy, while Britain possessed the most powerful military in the world. The American war plan largely revolved around a swift invasion and conquest of Canada, which leaders like Thomas Jefferson believed would be a mere matter of marching. This assumption proved to be disastrously wrong. On the high seas, American frigates like the USS Constitution won stunning single-ship duels against British warships. These victories, though strategically minor, were huge morale boosters for the American public. The most humiliating moment came in August 1814. After defeating Napoleon, Britain sent veteran troops to North America. They marched on Washington, D.C. and burned the White House, the Capitol building, and other public structures. The British then attacked Baltimore, but their bombardment of Fort McHenry failed, inspiring Francis Scott Key to write the poem that would become the American national anthem. The war ended with the Treaty of Ghent in December 1814, essentially a stalemate. In a final irony, the war's most famous battle, New Orleans, was fought 2 weeks after peace was signed, cementing American pride despite achieving few original goals. Although the War of 1812 is often overlooked, sandwiched between the Revolution and the Civil War, understanding its causes is vital to understanding the development of the United States. The conflict was a crucial test of American independence. By standing up to the world's greatest military power for a second time, the United States asserted its sovereignty on the world stage. It proved America was not merely a fragile experiment, but a durable nation willing to fight to protect its rights and honor. The war forged a new sense of national identity and unity born from shared struggle and survival. The causes highlight the fragile nature of neutrality. The United States tried to stay out of the Napoleonic Wars, but actions by Britain and France made that impossible. This taught leaders that economic interests and national security are often intertwined. True independence requires the power to defend those interests. This theme reappeared in American history, including the lead-up to World War I over a century later. Furthermore, the war's origins reveal the tragic role of the Western frontier. The conflict was not just about sailors and ships, it was also about land, expansion, and the fate of Native American peoples. For Native American tribes, the war was a catastrophic turning point. The defeat of Tecumseh's Confederacy and the loss of their British allies left them vulnerable to relentless American expansion in the decades that followed. Understanding this is essential for a complete and honest picture of American history, acknowledging the nation's growth often came at a profound cost to others. Finally, the War of 1812 reminds us that causes can fade into obscurity. Impressment and trade blockades, which drove a generation of Americans to fury, became moot once the wider European war ended. Yet the war they caused shaped borders, forged heroes like Andrew Jackson, created a national anthem, and launched the United States into a new era of self-confidence and westward focus. It affirmed the young republic was here to stay, a lesson that powerfully shaped the course of the 19th century and beyond.